Welcome, and I hope everybody's having a great conference so far. It's cooler today. Maybe we're feeling a little bit of relief from the heat. I'm here very, very pleased to introduce two of my fellow conference directors for a really thrilling session on interim leadership. So today you're going to be hearing from Chris Ferguson, Dean of Libraries at Murray State University. She coordinates the operations and outreach efforts for 2 libraries and 1 museum. She started her career in academic librarianship at Mississippi State University, and she served in higher education for over 20 years at this point, holding various positions in academic libraries. And most recently, Chris completed a 2-year appointment as interim dean of libraries at Murray State, and the appointment just became permanent in July of this year, so congratulations, Chris. And also Glenda Alvin is Associate Professor and Interim Executive Director of Libraries and Media Centers at Tennessee State University, an HBCU located in Nashville. This is her 4th year as interim, along with still continuing to serve in her permanent position as Assistant Director for Collection Management and Administration. And she previously worked at the College of New Jersey and at the University of Central Arkansas. And she's also been a Charleston Library Conference Director for over 15 years, and she edits a column entitled Collection Management Matters. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers today, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. So here we go.
Many thanks, Erin, for the delightful introductions. Oh, look, here comes Lindsay Kronk, tardy. Everybody. All right, well, thank you all for being here. Again, thanks to Erin for the introduction. Glenda and I'm Chris Ferguson, the Dean of Libraries at Murray State University. And Glenda and I both have had some similarities in our interim positions, but also some differences I think that you'll see as we talk about what our service has looked like. To provide a little bit more context, I have been at Murray State University for coming up on 10 years now. I'm right at a little over 9 years. And I was hired there as the Director of Technical Services in 2013. And then took on an additional role as the Assistant Dean in 2018. So that kind of establishes some context for my interim role, is that I had been at Murray State for some time before I was asked to serve in the interim position there. So interim leadership can come about for a variety of reasons. It could be a retirement. It could be that a leader is leaving for another position. It could be a temporary leave. So you could be asked to take on a temporary leadership when someone is on either medical leave, research, sabbatical, parental leave, like any number of reasons that you could be asked to do leadership on a temporary basis. And it can feel like you're a placeholder. It raises questions for you, for your colleagues in the library, for your administration. Things like, how long is this appointment going to last? How will you be expected to continue doing your current work, your current position? And mainly what will you do as the interim leader? So what will be your role, and what will you be expected to accomplish? So exactly what text do you fill in on the sign as an interim leader? And you might want to run away. I couldn't not include some Monty Python here. So, okay, so we're going to skip by that because that GIF can get annoying to watch after a while. So interim leadership is by definition a time of transition and uncertainty. And your reaction may be to run away. But before you do, let's talk a little bit about how to survive and even perhaps thrive in an interim role. So in approaching this presentation, I did what it is that librarians do, and I went and took a look at the literature. So I did a nice literature review on interim leadership. And in a study published in 2017, Kathy Irwin and Suzanne DeVries did a survey of 108 interim leaders, so people that had been in interim leadership positions and kind of looked for patterns. And then they followed those up with some more in-depth interviews. And they identified through these studies, through this survey and through these interviews, that there are kind of 4 main areas of focus for somebody in an interim leadership position: roles and expectations, learning and development, relationships and support, and advice for future interim positions. So I'm going to kind of approach my presentation by these 4 categories, and talk to you about what my experiences looked like. On a side note, I'm going to let this pass. Suzanne DeVries happens to be the Dean of Libraries at Western Kentucky University, which is 2 hours from me, and she and I correspond and talk regularly. So not only was I able to draw upon this article, like I could call her on the phone and say, hey, let's talk about interim leadership. So let's go on to roles and expectations. So one of the single most difficult challenges, I think, in an interim leadership is knowing and understanding where your boundaries are. What are the things you can do? What are the things you can't do? Is there anything that your leadership, whoever that might be at your university, wants you to accomplish? Is there anything that they don't want you to touch? What are your colleagues expecting of you? As the Dean of Libraries at Murray State, I report to the provost, and when I was asked to serve as interim, he and I sat down and had a conversation about what he wanted from me while I served. And to establish some context, I took over as interim dean in July of 2020. We had been the university that was, from March to July, I think everyone was shut down. And about the time that he and I sat down, I said, what do you want from me? Like, what are you looking for me in an interim role? And his answer was very simply, just keep the library running. So okay, I think I can do that. So that was the framework, but my interim appointment, and initially my appointment was supposed to be for 1 year. That was the deal, and we'll talk about this more later, but it ended up stretching into 2. Other conversations I think that you want to have with your leadership are things about duration, salary. Are there any university initiatives? Is there strategic planning going on? Like, what is the context in which that you are taking on this interim leadership role? And there are very likely going to be things that you don't have the experience to handle or that aren't within your frame of reference. So that could include hiring, training, evaluating personnel, mentorship, budgeting and finances, faculty development. And so my background was in technical services. As I said, I came to Murray State as a director of technical services, and prior to that, I had worked with serials and electronic resources. I had lots of experience in budgeting and financing. I'd been managing our collection to budget for years. As someone who worked with electronic resources, I was familiar with problem solving, and I had lots of experience planning long-term projects. But my own personal gaps were in things like fundraising. So our Dean of Libraries is expected to participate in development and fundraising, in the management and supervision of public services. I had all kinds of experience in the management and supervision of technical services, but public services was not really within my frame of reference. We had some building and construction work that we ended up doing. And then, honestly, one of the single biggest things that I didn't have enough frame of reference for was the university's internal processes. When you're hiring someone, what pieces of paperwork do I need to fill out? How many people need to sign that paperwork? So just navigating the university's internal processes was a challenge for me. And regardless of how much I learned, there were always more questions. There was always something I didn't know. So the most important thing for me was not that I needed all of the answers, but as nearly as important was the openness, inclusivity, and transparency with which I undertook this work, to be really open and honest about what I did know, what I didn't know, what I could do, what I couldn't do, and to make that really clear both to the upper administration and to the folks that I was now supervising internally in the libraries. And a great deal of it is also the humility to say, I don't know that. That's a great question. The number of times in the past 2 years that I said, I don't know, that's a great question. Let me do some research and get back to you. I mean, I've said it at least twice a day for 2 years now, maybe more. I want to pause kind of going through this and talk about the phenomenon of positional isolation. I'm doing the thing where I'm breathing into the microphone, I'm sorry. So I want to talk a little bit about positional isolation. And I just learned that this is something I have felt before, but not really had a name for. I learned about this official name on Twitter. Positional isolation is that feeling that you get when you are the only person that really truly understands your job, like what you're doing. So the feeling of being isolated due to the role that you play in your librarian organization. And I think as librarians, we're actually all kind of familiar with this. So at Murray State, we have a single metadata librarian, we have a single scholarly communications librarian, and a single special collections librarian. So the people that are our cohorts and that are our colleagues aren't necessarily in our own libraries. And the same is true when you're a dean or when you're in a leadership position. The people that you have worked with on a daily basis for the last however many years are not now your cohort and your colleagues in the work that you are doing. So one of the things that is important is to figure out who is your cohort now. So I learned through the course of this presentation that one of the names for a group of zebras is a cohort of zebras. They could also be called a herd, a zeal, or a dazzle. Dazzle is the name for, just a side note, the name for a group of zebras in motion, because of the way that their stripes make it look like they are fluid. When you're serving in an interim position, you need to figure out who your cohort is. So for me, I started actively looking for other people in leadership positions. I participate in a monthly conference call with all of the other deans and directors at libraries in Kentucky. So we have a group of us that we get together. I also meet on a monthly basis with the deans of other colleges in my own school. Within Murray State, so the deans of the other colleges and schools at Murray State, and then have a Zoom on a regular basis with deans and directors at other regional comprehensive schools. So other schools that are like Murray State, I sit down and meet with them about what they have going on. So this is the kind of advice section. As I've talked about, it's like some of the things that I would recommend is admit when you don't know the answer, advocate for your own needs and ask for help, and seek professional development opportunities. While I was serving as interim dean, as I said, the provost said to me, "No, I want you to keep the libraries running." We did. We never closed, by the way. Never had a COVID outbreak, we didn't have to close. But there were significant other things that came up in that. So during the time that I served as interim, we opened our makerspace. The libraries participated and played a central role in writing a centennial book for the university, which just celebrated its 100th year this year. We had a massive, catastrophic leak in our reference room, and it led to a whole total renovation of that space and a full assessment of what the reference collection looked like. I think if I had known, thankfully, that those things were not on my plate. When the provost sat me down and said, "I just want you to keep the library running," that was a very accomplishable task. I could focus on that. But had I known all of the things that were going to come my way, I don't know that I would have been quite so calm. So that's all to say that you really, I found it very helpful to focus on what was in front of me right at the time rather than thinking long term. So before I turn this over to Glenda, I got a couple of notes about the transitioning to permanent. So again, I just want to reiterate that the most important thing I found in being an intern was to be clear, clear about what I wanted, clear in what I could accomplish, what I couldn't accomplish, and to be even more communicative and open than I might have in the past. In transitioning, I will say that every interim deanship will theoretically at some point come to an end. I promise, Glenda. She's been interim for 4 years, so theoretically, every interim deanship is going to come to an end at some point. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will transition into that position permanently. So in the survey that Irwin and DeVries did, they found that just 37% of the people who had served in interim positions went on to apply for the permanent positions. There's a significant number of people that either don't apply or aren't interested, or it's a short period of time, and it can be a really valuable way to expand your skills, expand your frame of reference and your knowledge without having to take on, feeling like you have to take it on a permanent basis. So as I said, and as Erin explained, I served as intern for 2 years, and I was made permanent by appointment. So the provost met with my colleagues in the library. I happened to be out of town. But on a day when I was not present or was away from the library, he sat down and had an open conversation with them about how they felt I had been doing, what my performance looked like, did they have concerns about me taking this on? So they had an opportunity to weigh on that, and then I was made permanent through an appointment. Some universities, and it's varied at Murray State. I have seen interims go through an application process. I think because mine had extended for so long into 2 years that they looked at an appointment rather than application process. It is tempting to think that once you become permanent, all is clear, okay? That everything, and unfortunately, libraries are a change machine. So even after becoming permanent, I found that I had another transition to go through. So I had the opportunity to backfill some vacancies. So we have been going through searches where we've been sort of in a hiring hold for the last couple of years, so we're filling some vacancies. We're starting to do some strategic planning and thinking long-term for the future. The other thing I'd add is that I found that people held on to some things, like that even after 2 years, when I became permanent, I had a number of conversations that started with, now that you're real dean, can we, and fill in the blank. So even though it's tempting to think that the permanent appointment kind of settles things, it really just opens up a whole new series of doors. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Glenda, and she's going to talk a little bit about her time as an interim.
I came to Tennessee State in 1997 as head of acquisitions, and then I became head of acquisitions and serials. And I was promoted to coordinator and then assistant director for collection management. When the library dean retired, the assistant director for public services became the interim dean for 5 years, but he was also the assistant director for public services. When he retired, I became the interim executive director of libraries and media students, but I was still the assistant director for collection management, and I had to cover the assistant director for public services because they did not fill his position, and these were all on top of my previous positions. So I'm still head of acquisitions and serials. Okay, so I approach my interimship as something that I borrowed from my sorority hymn, capturing a vision. When they offered it to me, there were a lot of things to consider. Assuming another responsibility on top of my permanent positions, what type of support would I get from my direct support, the VP of Academic Affairs? What kind of support would I get from my library colleagues? And then, of course, there's the salary. Is it worth all of those extra positions and all the extra responsibility? And what could I accomplish that would make a difference and a lasting benefit to the library and the university? That was most important to me. And so I thought about it for a while, and I consulted some people whose leadership I respected. And at this conference, I've been here since the late 1980s. I had a program with Trevor Dawes, who is, I want to make sure I get it right, Vice Provost for Libraries and Libraries and Museums, and Mae Morris University Librarian at the University of Delaware, and Aisha Hakel, who's the manager of archives here at the at the College of Charleston. And we were walking back from the Gallier to Francis Marion, and I said to Trevor, I have this interim, I'm not sure what I can accomplish in a temporary position, and I'm not sure that I should be making changes. And Trevor said to me, and I respected him a lot, he says, if I were you, I would just go ahead and make the changes. And so that's what I did. Some of the unknowns that become known once you become interim is that people will retire, leaving vacant positions that have to be covered, resignations, there are buyouts, there are personnel problems, there's SACS accreditation in my case, there's facilities issues, leaking roof, failing HVACs, power outages, and so forth. Then there's budget management, grant writing, assessment reports like iPads that I had never done before, meetings, working with a new set of peers, deans, directors, vice presidents, and then comes the pandemic. So I decided to write my vision. And to do that, I had to decide what could practically be accomplished with or without funding. It's easier to get support if you're not asking for money. Then I had to review the existing positions, because once those positions became vacant during resignations and so forth, that was an opportunity to recreate and update the positions that we had, and then to look at the funding streams that we had to help make my changes. And I also had to evaluate my immediate supervisor. Had they been library supporters in the past? And fortunately, I've had 3 different interim vice presidents during my 4 years, and all of them at some point I had met or worked with in the university, so they sort of knew me and what I could do. And to make it plain, I went to scripture for that, Habakkuk 2:2, write the vision and make it plain. So what I did was I wrote out my vision of what the library's future should be. And I advise that when you do that, that you try to make it as brief and to the point as possible. So I tried to keep it to 3 pages, and I tried to eliminate, you build up a lot of resentment and animosity and baggage during the 25 years or so that you may have been at the university like I have. And you know who shot John. You know where the body's buried. You actually were there when the murder occurred. And you know who the guilty parties are. But this is not a time to go into all of that, okay? You want to assign blame, but try to control yourself. So I try to remove the defensive tone and just stay objective. And then I wrote the goals and objectives of what I intended to accomplish. I made a list that was 1, 2, 3, 4 of the changes that I wanted to make with the support. And then I tried to provide a library organization chart to show the vice president what the organization looked like now and what my vision for the university, for the library's organization was going to be. Then, after I got approval from the vice president and HR, I proceeded to make the changes. And some of the changes that I made were organizational, and some of the changes I made were to update the library. The assistant director for public services, once he retired, I converted that or changed it to assistant director for operations and planning. They still have responsibility for public services, but we're going to be doing major renovations, so I put that responsibility in that position. The reference librarian and serials librarian at our other campus, one was eliminated in the buyout and the other one retired, so I combined those positions into a technical services librarian. The general reference librarian resigned, and I made that into a scholarly communications librarian. The embedded librarian was unhappy with her job, and I looked at all the universities in Tennessee. I didn't see an embedded librarian position, so I upgraded her to student success and outreach librarian. Then the cataloging librarian, we had a librarian who was on leave. I asked her if she would take on the interlibrary loan responsibility. She did. She kept it for a year. I asked her would she like to keep it. She said yes. So I did a title change for her for cataloging to interlibrary loan librarian. Okay, I also made some supervisory changes. We had a head of reference who was also assistant director, and so I had to change that position, and I made it coordinator of research and instruction. And I also renamed the department. The systems metadata librarian became the head of technology assessment and systems, and I had the computer specialist and web manager reporting to the dean, or in my case, executive director, and so now they report to her. The library manager was a paraprofessional position. I got that upgraded to a faculty position, and it became the head of access services. And I also transferred a library assistant 3 in circulation to special collections because as we migrated to electronic, we had less books to shelve, and we had too many people, and they were all getting on each other's nerves and running up to my office to complain about each other. So I said, okay, we need to do a little transitioning. And then I did some job title changes because you can do job title changes without any increase in salary. And people had migrated in their responsibilities, but their job title did not reflect what they actually did. So the technical services software librarian had migrated to being an electronic resources librarian where she handled licensing and things pertaining to the databases. The research administrative coordinator was always misnamed. He supervised the evening circulation responsibility. So I renamed the department Access Services and made him Access Services Evening Supervisor. The web manager, I changed his to Library Service Manager, and also the government documents librarian, when she saw the changes going on, she wanted to change. So I said, well, what do you want to change to? And that gave her an opportunity to look around and see what other government documents librarians were titled. And she decided that since government documents had diminished as a major responsibility for the position, she wanted to be instruction and engagement librarian, and I agreed with that. And then there were some positions that were eliminated. When I became head of acquisitions, we had an accounting clerk who handled checking in the books and paying for the invoices and so forth. But as we migrated more to electronic, she had less and less and less to do. So I just decided to get rid of that position and merged it into the 2 senior library assistants. And I also mentioned before the serials librarian at Avon Williams, our other campus. That was a buyout decision by the administration to eliminate. Okay, I also did some morale moves. A lot of what I did was re-envisioning the operating budget, and I also should mention that none of these just came about. To change positions, sometimes you have to do a job reclassification. Ours is 16 pages, but you know, whatever HR demands that to get this done, that's what you do. And so some of them came about because I had to do the reclassification. Some of them came about through the Vice President of Academic Affairs saying, okay, we'll make this small change. With the operating budget, we needed a security guard, and the previous permanent dean had tried to get a security guard, and the director of purchasing / procurement had told her, no, it's the campus police's responsibility to guard the library. The campus police said, we don't have the staff to do it. Therefore, the library limped along year after year without a security guard. So I asked the procurement director that we now have, who was the assistant director under the other one, if we could have our own security guard, outsource it. And he said, it's okay with me if it's okay with the campus police. And the campus police says, I'm fine with it if you get someone that we approve. So that was one of those deals where, as Ayana Van Zant says, you just do the work. You go from one person to the other, and whatever they need, that's what you try to get in order to get to your goal of having a security guard in the evening for the staff. And we also, for the first time, got a graduate student assigned to us from the graduate school, but we discovered that we needed another one, so I reallocated out of the operating budget for a second graduate student. And the staff requested they just requested 2 vending machines. And this was a case where when you contact the people who are in charge of the vending machine, they said, well, we didn't put the library in the contract. I said, well, we like to be in the contract. So they did add us when it came time to renew so that we could get vending machines. Also, there are other things that you can just individually do to build morale. For instance, the cataloging in the library loan librarian was the only one who didn't have an office. The accountant had an office, but she didn't. And so when the accountant resigned, I asked her, so would you like to have an office? And she said yes. And she later admitted, she says, I really feel like a real librarian now I have an office. But there are things that even if people don't ask, you can look around and see that it will build their morale if you make an extra step. This is a list of some of the accomplishments that I've done to date, and I won't run through them. And there's another list of different things that that I attempted and was successful at. One of them was getting a public computer. All the public universities in Tennessee had public computers, and our IT department didn't want to do it for us. And so I finally went to academic affairs, and they said, do it, and he still dragged his feet. But I happened to know the network administrator, and I saw him on campus one day when I was doing my Weight Watcher steps, and I approached him and asked him, I said, we have this problem. And he said, okay, and he made it happen. So it took 2 years, but it was a matter of going through all the steps and then finding the right person who could make it happen. So each time you have something that may have been a wall before, you can try to work through it. And during all of this, I'm still doing acquisitions and serials. I'm still sending out fund reports. I'm still ordering books. I'm still helping with the licenses and selecting databases and so forth. So I'm still trying to do the same things I did when I was just head of acquisitions and serials. These are some of the new adventures that we have. We have a $30 million renovation coming for our main campus, and we also have a $100,000 renovation coming for our Avon Williams campus. And so what I wanted to say in conclusion is that if you are given an interim position, not to regard it just as a placeholder or to see it as a stopgap, but to see it as an opportunity to be transformative in whatever way that you can to move the library forward, to help the staff, and to just make it better, a better place for your having been there for whatever length of time. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, y'all. That was absolutely terrific. I learned a lot. I mainly learned, I think Chris and Glenda, y'all deserve some kind of like beach vacation, cruise, spa day, something.
I'd settle for collection development and acquisitions librarian.
All right, well, if we have any takers, no, but really.
We have a position that hosted.
I just learned a lot, and I'm also just incredibly impressed with your persistence and creativity and perseverance and also communication and political savvy at your institutions. I really did just make some notes for myself. And if anyone's looking for a really cool name for starting a band, I think Dazzle of Zebras wins. So, yeah. All right, we got about 10 minutes for questions. So if anybody has questions, raise your hand or gesture wildly. And all right.
I have a comment and a question for Glenda. The comment is, it sounds to me like all these changes you made boil down to it's not what you know, but who you know. You knew the right people to go to get help. And my question is, what happened to you? Did the interim director become the director eventually?
That's the continuing saga. My predecessor was interim for 5 years.
Chris, Glenda, Meredith Wilson, BU Libraries, thank you both so much for allowing us the space to learn with you today. I find both of your leadership really inspirational. Question for both of you, I suppose. How do you all, we're all operating in such intense scarcity right now at our institutions to varying degrees. How do you all remain sort of hopeful and positive and keep your energy levels up to keep doing that thing of continuing to try to find the right person to continue to advocate for your staff? Thanks.
So I can't do it by myself. So that's very much a team effort, and I think that comes with. I'm fortunate to work with a really extraordinary group of really talented people. We do take a very team atmosphere, and that's not to say that we don't have difficulties and we don't have challenges, but I do think that we're all in it for what's best for the libraries. I have found, so when people want things that we can't do, again, I find being really honest about what I am capable of doing, what I am not capable of doing, and then having a conversation about what is the, okay, so we've talked about currently our museum is unstaffed. So we have looked at different ways. I've advocated for, we had a retirement, and then after that retirement, the position was frozen, and then eventually it was literally 1 year it just disappeared off the budget line. So we've talked about how to do that, and we've asked for refilling that line. We've looked at some alternatives, but ultimately the conversation is about how can we get the museum open. So we might not be able to staff that position as it once was, but to be creative in thinking, being like really getting down to the nitty gritty of what it is that we want to accomplish it. And maybe it's not going to work out the way that we wanted, but how can we get there through an alternative route?
I think it helps to have buy-in from your staff. I had 25 years at the library. I had a reputation of getting things done, and in some cases I was the department head. Even though I wasn't the department head, I would look up and circulation would be standing in my door. They want me to make a policy about this, that, and the other, and the fact that I said that I'm not your department head did not deter them at all. And so when I came to the position, people had a certain amount of trust in my judgment and in my leadership. And I was able to go to them and say, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. And as long as you're willing to ask them and you can explain, you can get help. And throughout the pandemic, I was able to keep the library open because people were, first of all, they were dedicated to the students, and also they believed in library service. And I come from a tradition of the HBCU I went to for graduate school was Atlanta University. And I never shall forget when I first got my first job at Ybor City Library, branch library, the director told us that we hire AU graduates because they know how to do, they can figure it out. And that's how I am at the HBCU where I work at. We figure out how to get it done. And that is the attitude that we have for serving the students, how to get it done.
So I just want to say both of you are very impressive to me, and I just feel like, you both deserve full positions the way, and I hope that you hear soon about your interim changing to permanent. One question I have for Chris, when you were appointed as the dean, did you end up having the perks that would normally come along with like a person who went through the whole search process and everything that might have some perks for hiring? Or was that something that they were parceling out while you were interim?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by perks. I did get a better parking pass, so so I did.
Funding for something or additional personnel?
Okay, so if I wanted funding, there was I could certainly go to the provost and say, like, so this year, and I'm honestly trying to remember if it happened pre-permanent or not, but I certainly had the ability to say, this is a need, this is something we want to do. One of the major projects, as I said, one of the major projects we did was we actually we have a museum. The libraries are over a museum on campus, and this is Murray State's centennial year, and we worked to build a new exhibit chronicling Murray State's 100-year history with an emphasis on focusing on things like integration and diversity and how Murray State has changed both in terms of the size of the university, but also the diversity of its student body and its faculty and that kind of thing. So we did that, and I was able to work with the president to get additional funding to build that exhibit. It was not an inexpensive endeavor. And I have found that even though I was interim, I was getting full support of the university administration, and I did get a better parking pass. I would also say this is where you advocate for both yourself and the people under you. So regardless of whether you're interim, the worst that somebody can say to me is no, and anything. So I don't want to like delve into trite generalizations, but you have to be willing to kind of face that rejection, I think. So part of that is being like, okay, not everything's going to work out, and how do I move forward from that? So really the worst anybody could say is, no, you can't have money for that exhibit. And then we would figure it out.
I think we might have time for one more very quick question.
Thank you. So I have come up through various tracks, and then, you have additional hats. So I was nodding vigorously back here as you were talking about all of your different titles. Mm-hmm. How do you prioritize and make sure that the small tasks that you are still responsible for are not kind of falling through the cracks as some of these, larger kind of visioning projects are taking priority or precedence for the institution?
Well, sometimes it is difficult to keep all the balls in the air. Like last year, I could not spend all of the money. So this year I told the librarians, you have to help me, and we have to get this money spent. I'm going to Charleston to meet with the vendors to see if I can spend some of this money. But you have to prioritize in order of importance. And sometimes the accreditation report takes precedence over other things. And you also have to know who you can delegate things to that will, the person will follow through. You need a good support system. So in regards to your questions, I always go with what's the most, the thing that's going to have the most importance, what's most vital to get done in that time frame that's going to benefit the students and the staff. And then if that takes Saturday, if that takes Sunday, if that takes coming home, eating dinner, and going until 11 o'clock, then that's what has to happen, because you cannot get all of that done in your 37.5 hours. So you have to be willing to sacrifice some. And I know if you have a family, that's difficult, but fortunately or unfortunately, I'm single, so I can make those choices. But yes, when you're juggling different hats, you do have to prioritize what is the most critical.
Thanks. So, oh, did you want to speak, Chris?
I keep coming back to this. I think part of it is again being open and honest with the people around you to say, listen, these are the things that are going on, or these are the things that you guys have talked about that you want to do, but I can't do all of them. Give me some feedback. What are your priorities? What is it that you want to accomplish? And then I take it. I would often kind of say, okay, well, what people have said to me is most important to them is this. And so that's where we're going to focus.
Thanks so much, Chris and Glenda. This was wonderful. Thanks, everybody.